Welcome to Disc Reviews with Altitude, where I'm going to take you through a lot of disc reviews over the coming months, but I'm going to do it from a Colorado perspective, so we get a little bit more of an angle to see how these discs fly at high altitude. We're here at a nice, crisp fall day here at East Interlochen Park here. Perfect course for showing off some putters. And today, I'm going to focus primarily on the MVP range and the Castleplast Berg. I recently got a hold of a couple of the MVP ranges. I've been a big Berg guy. I've been a Berg thrower for quite some time, and I got them both in the glow plastic. We've also got some BergX's and a couple other putters to throw in there just to kind of show you some of the slightly different flights. We're gonna take a quick look at them. People were excited for this. It's a puddle-topped thumb track style approach disc from MVP, the first from MVP. Whether they'll be able to make something similar with an overmold, I don't know yet. But I do hope they make this in all the other plastics, especially like soft proton would be amazing. Like I said, I have been a big Berg thrower for a long time. As you know, the Berg is kind of a do-it-all disc for approaching, and it's the idea about it when I switched to it was it kind of corrects a lot of different mistakes you can possibly make. As when you're gaining putter touch, I actually stopped bagging them just for a long time just so I could increase my touch with putters. But now that I'm back in kind of more serious competition, I've been using them quite a bit because they're slow, low glide. They don't move a whole lot. It's pretty hard to like really burn them over. And it reduces the variance in how hard you need to throw them and whatnot. Just because it's so low glide and so it doesn't move off its line a whole lot, you're just not gonna, your misses are gonna be more minimal than you would with something like a faster approach disc, like an Envy, or even like something overstable like a Zone or something. Now I have recently switched from the Berg to the BergX, and the most of this year I've actually been throwing the BergX simply because the Berg was just a little too straight for what I wanted, especially when the soft plastic ones I was throwing the Stokely, the K3 kind of soft line. These beat in fairly quick and they become almost understable. Not a whole lot so, but they do kind of start to flip around. And when I got hold of the BergX, and they're just a little bit more overstable, a little bit more dumpy, which actually makes them a little bit more useful to me. You can kind of put them on a little bit more harsher angles, especially when you're doing approaches or woodsy shots. You can do a lot more, I think, with the BergX, and they're a little bit more consistent, but it doesn't take out the fact that the usefulness of the Berg. So I'm going to take a quick look at like the Berg versus the range. If you can get it to focus on it, you can see the Berg is a little bit taller and just a tiny bit more blunt, which makes it, the Berg is listed as a 1102. I've never really felt like it's a 2 fade. To me, it's more like a 1100. It just doesn't really have a whole lot of fade. And like I said, once they get beat in a little bit, they even have tiny bit of drift and turn to them. This glow one was in my bag for a little bit. It's not super beat in. I have a couple more beat in ones that we'll compare. Whereas the range, being that's a little thinner, for some people don't like the thickness of the Berg. But you still want that type of disc. This may be better for you. It's a little thinner. It's a little bit easier to grip this kind of rounded edge with the puddle top, but it also makes it a tiny bit faster of a disc. I think the range is listed at a 2-speed, 21.5 or negative 0.51. So they do list it as having a little bit of a turn and a little bit of a fade. And I find that to be pretty close to true. It might even be almost like a -1.1. It doesn't really fade a whole lot, but it also doesn't really flip a whole lot, but it will do both. Same with the kind of the Berg. The thing about the fade on the Berg is, unless you have a lot of height, it's just not going to move very far off the line. Even on like a Hyzer, it's not going to drift very far, just because of the way it flies. And the range is very similar, especially when you give it a little bit of power. It's going to finish mostly straight. I actually like to refer to the the range to me feels almost like a proxy that is a little bit slower and a little less glide. I throw it the same way on a slight hyzer flip up, lets it push straight, and it will it'll finish mostly straight. If you give it a little bit of height, it will kind of drift a little bit, it will hyzer, or if you hit it really hard, it will drift slightly to the right. One here at Interlochen, it's just a one little 180 foot, nice little kind of straight ahead. This is kind of perfect for like a quick demo of how these will fly. I'm gonna try to keep you on the flight path. I'm gonna throw these mostly backhand to start with, and then we'll do some forehand tests. So what I've found, I have a kind of a general rule with how altitude affects the flight of discs. For about every 2,000 feet or so, I think you lose about half a point of glide, lose about a half a point of turn, and gain about a half a point of fade. And that's kind of my general rule of thumb. Obviously, flight numbers are all kind of made up numbers anyway, but they're all, and different throughout manufacturers. But that can kind of give you a general idea. If you know how your disc flies relative to its flight numbers, that's kind of like a general thing that I'll find that'll happen as you kind of go up in altitude. As I've gone down in altitude, I kind of switch accordingly. I also have noticed that tends to affect drivers a lot more than it does putters. Here at altitude, putters for the most part, it does affect them a little bit, just in less amount, because one, they're so slow, especially these slow ones. The lack of air mass, I don't think affects them nearly as much as like a faster disc and throwing at a faster speed. So putters and mid-ranges tend to fly mostly the same until you start getting really, really high altitudes. Here at Denver, you don't see that big of a difference in putters unless you're trying to get some very overstable ones. Like NVs tend to be pretty stable here, whereas a lot down at sea level, they're kind of a very straight disc. So anyway, let's get started here. So we got 180. We're going to start with a few. We'll start with the Berg. This is a glow Berg. This is kind of like a standard, probably the most stable of the Berg runs. It's pretty consistent. I'm going to try to keep these on a fairly similar angle. I'm going to try to get these as flat as I can here. And you'll see it just kind of glide and go in the basket. Oh, deep. Well, now if I put the range on that same angle with the same power, I would expect it to be fairly similar, though I think it will be slightly straighter and probably slightly further. Yeah, a little bit straighter right over the top and just a little bit further, but you can see it's very similar. It does kind of pop up and drift very slightly, but it doesn't move a whole lot. And it should be similar to kind of this beat-in K3 Berg. That was a little higher, but you can see it's very straight, very similar. Hard to see a huge difference at this distance. Here is my kind of more beat-in. It's a clear K1. This was my original one I bagged for about a year. You see, it does have some stability. I don't think I got quite as much on that one. And then we'll go to the BergX's. This is my kind of K1, not as beat in as my K1 soft, but you'll kind of see a different stability with the BergX. Now go in the basket. There we go, aced. You can see it just gets down quicker, doesn't drift as much, stays on the line, and there we go. I finally got an ace on film. I mean, granted, that was like my fifth throw, but I have aced with this one in a tournament. This is my soft BergX. Twice or it's luck. Oh, see how much more fade it has? That was significantly more right than my initial throws, and lower, and it still kind of ended up in the same spot where the initial Bergs were. And then for comparison, I'm going to show you like some of the slightly faster discs. This is a Glow Proxy, and I'll try to keep it very similar. Kind of see the difference in speed and flight. And see how much straighter and longer a Proxy will push versus the range. Here's a Watt, Vision Watt. Even straighter. Does not want to like fade at all. And here's a Rebirth Envy. Pretty stable at this altitude. You can see it starting to hyzer. Oh, thought that was going to go in again. But you can see it starting to hyzer like right away, and it's going to push and drift quite far out to the left. And then I have a second range. Now we're going to go, after I've thrown everything else, we'll rethrow the range here. See how very straight it is. It just doesn't really want to fade until it really slows down. And you can see it's just a little bit more straight pushing than any of the Bergs are. You can see here the Bergs are all pretty close. I moved a couple of these putters up. You can see the ranges just push a little further, and then the Proxy pushes even further. And like I said, the Envy probably would have pushed much further, same as the Watt had they not hit anything. Here is a little further, a little 261, kind of downhill though, so something we can still kind of throw with a slow putter, and what I'd actually typically want to throw with a slow putter, because you can see down behind the basket there is an irrigation ditch. Thankfully, it's basically dry right now. Typically, it's high enough that it can be really hard to get your disc back sometimes. Hopefully this is a good angle. So yeah, we got 261, but it's downhill, and typically this is where I would throw a very slow putter or something stable enough to keep it to kind of finish into the slope and prevent me from going long into the creek. So this was typically where I would probably throw my Envy or my BergX, depending on how I was feeling on the day. But we're gonna start with the range here. I have to throw it a little bit harder and a little bit downhill, so we'll see some of the kind of different flights at it. Just didn't get quite enough on it. Got to give it a little bit more juice. Here's the Glow Berg. And the Berg just kind of sits down, but a little too long. And that's the danger, even with the Berg, which is typically why I throw my BergX. A little bit better of a throw, but it definitely doesn't want to get down even more, and it doesn't want to drift at all usually. We'll go one more round with the Bergs. All right, we'll go another K1 Berg. That one has some decent stability, despite I haven't thrown it in a long time. That used to be my money Berg. It is fairly beat in. Another range. And you can see it's just a little faster and it just drifts more. I think I Hyzered that just a touch. I'll try to repeat that with the soft Berg here. Yeah, that was terrible. But you can see the soft Berg wants to fly the same way, pretty much. And then my other BergX. See, that one I can actually release it slightly and Hyzer, and you can see it get back flat and get to the ground. Again, that's pretty much why I bag the BergX. We'll throw the Envy. See, the Envy is pretty stable here, but way faster. A lot harder to keep close. I can ease up, I can soft those. like I'm trying to throw fairly the same power on all of these, so you get a different, so you get as much of the similar, so you get as much of the realistic flight. If I allowed myself to adjust, I would obviously throw these faster discs a little slower in order to keep them close by. It's not that I can't throw them on this hole. I just like the fact that I don't have to be as touchy with them as I do with something like a BergX or a Berg or even the range. But you saw even the range, you do still have to control your angles and your touch a decent amount. Okay, hole 3, it's a 220 foot, it's just kind of straight ahead, but we've got the irrigation ditch on the left, and the hill drops off starkly to the right, or to the left, and it makes it kind of dangerous to try and get it pretty close. And depending, like in tags, we'll play sidewalk is also hazard, so you do have to land on some grass. This time I'm going to start out with the BergX, and I'll try to kind of get it. I'm basically going to try to go aim at the big tree, the thick tree to the right, between the basket and the light post. You kind of, so this is where I actually wouldn't throw the BergX, because if I miss the height, there's a good chance it will kind of drift too far left and down the hill. But we'll see what we can do here. But I pulled it straight and right enough and low enough that that's how you kind of stay on the path. But this is where typically I'm bagging the range for right now, because I like to actually Hyzerflip it. Since it does have a little turn, I would not throw it flat like that, because flat risks kind of drifting to the right a little too much. And too much Hyzer and too much height, it will also kind of fade down the hill. But I like to give it a little bit of a Hyzerflip. So I'll kind of show you, this is how I actually think why this disc is great, and the best use case for it is giving it a slight Hyzerflip. So it should flip up, carry very straight, and then tends to finish straight and flat. See if I can pull it off here. You see it flip up and then continue to push straight. And that's kind of why I really like the range, because it does have that little flip. And as my throw has evolved, I'm evolving into much more of a kind of Hyzerflip and even general Hyzer thrower. It's just more consistent, especially when the more you start to get over the disc for power, the more you start having consistent releases. And you see a lot of pros, release everything on Hyzer for a reason. And I think the Hyzerflip is one of the most consistent shot types to throw. And I'll get into that some other day. But the idea of it is, you go to Hyzerflip 1, you're going to go straight if you have the right discs. And then when you miss, when you grip lock it a little bit, it tends to just turn into a gentle Hyzer, even to like just a full Hyzer. And you tend to get similar results. But I'm going to try to do the same thing with the Hyzerflip with the Berg, this Glow Berg. I don't know if it'll flip up quite as well as the range does. It still does flip up a little bit, but you can kind of see it never quite start to drift over, but that's part like the range. I missed the angle at the range. I wanted to go straight at it, but you can kind of see why a Hyzerflip is so good. We'll go with the Watt, which I also like the Hyzerflip. Flies very similar to the range. And we'll go with the Envy is what I would throw if I wanted to throw a little more flat. And what I would typically throw the Envy, I would throw it slightly out to the right and let it fade in. So if you try to Hyzerflip it too much straight at it, thankfully that was low enough to stop by the basket. But if that was any higher, that was gone down the hill here. Go another Hyzerflip with the range. See there, heavy Hyzer, flips up, glides straight, stays straight the whole time. Here's a K1 Berg. Nice again. Pretty similar, fairly straight. You can kind of see just this very slight bit more fade. Had that been on the same line and height as the range, probably continues down the hill a little bit. Here's the K3 Berg. And you can see the K3 Berg is significantly more understable. It wants to flip up, even with a little more air under it. The range flies very similar to the K3 Berg, but I find it just a touch more reliable. And this is my BergX. Yeah, those are all pretty good for this hole. Man, this hole is normally hard in tags, and I think I just parked it with like 7 discs. All right, review is going pretty well so far, I guess. See, everything's pretty solid, which is the reason I love these slow discs. I don't know if you can see kind of how steep and quickly this drops off. If you go over here at all, like you're way down in the stream down there, and almost everything is in circle one. Even the range just pushes 10 feet further than the Bergs. It's just a tiny bit faster than the Bergs. But you can see some of that's variant on power, as like I went even a little deep with my BergX. Granted, I feel comfortable throwing those a little harder. Now we're going to do a little forehands. This is an alternate tee for hole 4 here. The normal hole is about 290. It's back behind us a little bit. A little out of the range for the Bergs. I could probably get them there, but I don't. It's a little bit more than what you'd probably want to throw with it typically. Like I said, unless I think the range actually works pretty well at that range. But because it does, it's like I said, it's a little faster than these Bergs. But this is a great example of a place where I would use the Bergs a lot. We want a kind of a slow drifting forehand, something that doesn't fade back real hard, because we've got the irrigation ditch on the left. So we're going to kind of go high, basically a turnover forehand. I'm going to start with the Glow Berg. That I overturned it a little bit, but you can see it doesn't really just dive. And we'll go with the range. Surprisingly, holds up pretty well to forehand torque. You've seen Eagle like do flip up forehands with this to get them to like go straight and drift a little bit even. I kind of like these high ones. You can do the angle a little bit more subtle. I think it's a little easier to hit the angle. I overdid it on that Berg. It's kind of a nice subtle turnover. You need a little more height. And then I like the BergX's for this because I can chop them a little bit, and then it should actually fight out and finish a little flatter. You can see it fighting out. And that's why I like the BergX a little bit more for this particular type of shot. It depends on what you want it to do. If you want it to hold over the whole time, I think you throw something like the range or the Berg. I'm going to give this one a little bit more height. This is the range number 2. We have a little bit more height. Give it a little bit more time to kind of flatten itself out, and that's actually parked. And we'll try that also with the Berg. The Berg shocked me at how comfortable they were to forehand. The thumb track surprisingly feels really good to actually, especially for these touchy forehands like in the woods and stuff. Now pan out. Yeah, just perfect. Just like that. I'm gonna go BergX. Oh, overcooked that one just a little bit. And I find it actually harder. I should be able to do this with like an Envy, but I find it usually a bit harder. Even though the Envies are pretty decent for forehand because they're so thin, they're still not like a zone or anything. I do not typically forehand an Envy. And you can see how terrible it comes out of my hand, and overdid the angle. Yeah, they just don't come out of. Granted, I'm familiar with forehanding the Bergs, but also I think the thumb track and just the shape, they just work better, at least for me, for forehands versus like a normal putter. And see, that soft BergX just doesn't fight out of the angle at all. Something, you can see like something with the rim shape, I think just makes them cleaner, at least for me and the way I forehand. And yeah, you can kind of see the difference where I like having both. Again, I'm bagging currently both the range and the BergX because they're different enough that they change kind of the flight pattern of what I want them to do. You can see here, the BergX was pretty good, but this is just the shape of that shot plays so much better for these kind of less stable ones that just drift a little further. And that's kind of like the main difference between the BergX and the Berg and the range. All right, we'll do a little bit of some approaches here. This is about a, I don't know, 170, 180 foot throw here. Do a little bit of, you can kind of Hyzer, but with the trees on the left and with the ditch on the right, we don't really typically want a Hyzer. I think my normal play would be to almost go straight at this or even slightly try to turn it. But we can Hyzer, so I'll go in with a normal play here. Here's the range. So let me make sure that I'm in view here. Kind of a very slight flip up. And just kind of a nice soft kick in, which is how I would play it. Or I would go like BergX, and I would kind of actually give it a little Hyzer to keep it away from the stream and to kind of go around this. Might be a little bit safer of a play. And let it kind of come out. But that one is starting to get pretty beat in. Here's my less beat in K1 normal. Oh, whoa, I cranked that way over. God, I'm not doing these very good. We'll do that with a glow Berg. Kind of a soft drift. These are not great approaches. And we'll do the range on a bit of a Hyzer. It's a little bit more risky with these trees, but kind of a nice soft go in. Ooh, a little bit of a Hyzer. We'll do the Berg on a Hyzer. Yep. And the K3 soft. Nice little soft approach. Here's another 245. This is one's hole, but we got a little bit of elevation and you can't quite see the basket because it is actually behind the tree out there. So I'll swing in here a little bit to the left. It's a bit hard to see. I might have to go way, way left, but it's basically deep of that pine tree a bit. So here's an example of kind of where I think typically I would throw a something more overstable like an entropy or zone, because I can throw it wider and let it cut in. And this is kind of where I think this is where you might be able to see that why these are a little bit hard to use in certain situations. And like, we'll go with, normally I'd probably throw the BergX out of the discs I have here to get the closest. But we'll start with the glow Berg, and we'll try to get it on a Hyzer angle to see if we can't get it to drift up enough. There is enough elevation drop here that it should be able to get left, but occasionally throwing certain levels of power it will just want to kind of go straight, and it's hard to get that left finish. So we'll see what we can do here. And I cut it in a little inside and a little too light, so I need to go a little bit wider. We'll go two bergs and then 2 ranges to kind of give myself a chance to correct here a little bit. So this is another berg, another K1 berg here. See if I can get that a little bit better. And a little too much Hyzer. And that actually is cutting hard left, so I think there might be a crosswind. The way that kind of suddenly moved left, there might be some wind out there. We'll go with the range. There, you get a little bit more flip. But see, that's the problem, is once it flips, it's just gonna kind of finish straight. And if you overdo it like the Berg's throws, you get a little too much, it never flips up. I'll try to get a little bit steeper of a Hyzer and maybe a little bit more air. Nope, and then I go inside, and you can kind of see it just never, too much Hyzer, too inside. So this is where like they get a little bit touchier. Like I said, I think this typical shot for me would be a zone, because I can just kind of throw it straight and wide and let it Hyzer on its own. We'll try it with the BergX's and see if they Hyzer enough. These I can pretty much just throw flat. See, that's pretty good. But even the BergX, you see, it's pushing and it gets a little bit left, but it just doesn't fade that much. It'll fade, but it kind of just drops out of the sky. See, even on a Hyzer, even with the BergX, with a lot of airspace, they just don't move. Those are pretty good. And like I said, I can manage with the BergX's. So like I said, this is just something, a shot I wouldn't probably typically do with these discs. See, and I try to high Hyzer that soft berg, and it just kind of flips up and then just drifts straight, which is kind of not what you want. You can see my BergX is pretty good, but everything else either too inside or too straight. See the range and the K3 berg. I've got hole 6 here is a 258 foot hole. Feels slightly longer than that to me, I don't know. But this is kind of at the max range of what I would really want to throw these speed discs at. But I'm just going to throw one off this tee. Since we kind of had plenty of tee shots, I'm going to give you one of each and kind of show you these at kind of at max power. And then we'll get into like a little bit more of some use cases here, since the holes start to get a little bit longer after this. So we're gonna try it, and we got a fairly stiff, a little bit of a headwind right here, to kind of see how these hold up to wind. We'll start with the Glowberg. Probably gonna give it just a very slight Hyzer, just to get a little bit more power and handle the wind a little bit. Yeah, it flips up a little bit. It kind of drifted. You see the headwind, it drifted a little bit and not quite get there, a little too high, and I pulled it just a little bit. This is the BergX. Yeah, a little bit short. But see how it handles the wind really well. And here's the range. I think I can get the range there because it's faster, but I think I have to be quite a bit more Hyzer angle to get it to flip up. See, I almost have to drift it over. Oh, and I parked it. So you can see the range is quite a bit better at getting there. Since that first berg throw was not that great, I'll try to recreate it with the other K1 berg. There we go. definitely more stable on a Hyzerflip, especially that one. And what I would normally throw on this is I would throw probably an NB and just kind of, it's a little more consistent. I can go a little flatter. Oh, I went a little deep. So could have gone a little softer than that. Here we're up the fairway a bit. This is more of a standard use case. And this is kind of where I typically actually like to throw this disc for a simple upshot. And I like to throw kind of standstill at this range. And the nice thing about the range, like I said, I can give it almost a little bit of a Hyzerflip approach. And just kind of soft it in there on a lofty Hyzerflip. Same thing with the light Berg. A little bit extra Hyzer on that one. And then when I typically approach with the BergX, I'm typically going to go either flat or even very slight Hyzer and go almost straight at it. And let it kind of drift out of that Hyzer. Drive was a little bit short, and then the BergX upshot also a little bit short, but that upshot is pretty consistent. It's a nice punch. But there's the range drive and my range approach. You can kind of see the difference in them. You can see my NB actually went way long. All right, we do some more forehand here. At about 200 feet in a headwind. Let's see how these kind of hold up. The range isn't it's fairly torque resistant. It's very comfortable in the hand. It is just not the most stable. It will handle some wobble and smoothness, but like I'm gonna try to throw this as flat as I can and try to get there with a flat. It will probably drift over. Yeah, but not like ridiculously so, you know. And my forehand isn't the smoothest, but it's more of a flip up forehand. So I'll see if I can't get it there with a flip up forehand. This is kind of how Eagle has been using it. That still rolled over a little bit, but fairly straight though on a flip up. My flip up isn't super smooth, so it's hard to tell like if I'm putting a little bit of torque on the end of that. Whereas like a Berg, I can actually push it a little harder and a little flatter. A little bit more consistent. The Bergs are just a little bit better at holding a forehand. And if you want to get the same flip up, you can kind of go into like a K3 soft. You can kind of get that flip up. Now, if I had the range on that angle, I think it would have fallen about the same. I think I torqued it over a little bit. I typically like to throw the BergX on the forehand because I can come a little bit flatter to Hyzer. And you almost have to change the way you aim with them because what I've noticed, like I said, even the BergXs just don't move laterally a whole lot. So the Glow Berg and the two ranges were pin high right next to each other. The BergXs were off to the right, a bit short, but still inside C1. So literally all of those discs were in C1, which is pretty impressive, which is kind of the nice thing about this. Even if you slightly miss your line, like I said, even though those just drifted, they don't drift that far. And we'll go kind of one more round. You can kind of see a little bit more of the forehand. There's a little bit higher, more of a drifty. But see, it's just hard to get it to move left, which is why, like, if you're used to throwing a zone or something where that would kind of come in and spike, you have to change your angle to aim a lot more directly at what you're trying to get to. That was a little bit early inside, but even then, like I said, it's fairly straight. We'll go with the K3 soft. A little bit of a flip up, but that's just too straight. That K3 soft. So I'm gonna try to do the same thing with the range, but put it a little bit more toward the pin here. Oh, I just keep torquing those over a little bit. I think the thinner profile, I have to adjust my release just a little bit. There we go. Oh, go in. Oh, and that's kind of how you want to aim the forehand, a little bit straighter at it. Like I said, I had to adjust a little bit the thinness of the range, and just a little extra turn. I got to make sure I get a little bit cleaner of a release, a little bit more Hyzer. Whereas the BergX's, I can almost anhyzer. Oh, that was too. That came out a little nose up early. We'll go with the other one a little bit more here. There we go. Yeah, and then you're just gonna get putts. Pretty consistent overall. Like I said, once you adjust your aim point to kind of be more in line with the target, they just don't move out of that range a whole lot once you kind of get consistent with them. Or there you have it. There's a good look at the new MVP range versus the BergX at altitude. Like I said, altitude I think doesn't affect these type of discs nearly as much, probably because they don't take a whole lot of air mass to get up to speed, so you're not going to see the effects nearly as much. I can imagine at sea level, these are probably definitely a little straighter and flippier than they are here. You do see it a little bit here at altitude, but for the most part, you can see the range still has quite a bit of turn and will drift. And a beat-in BergX, or a beat-in Berg, K3 Berg, will also have a very similar flight where it will flip up and it will drift. And so, in conclusion, the range is a great disc. It feels really good in the hand. It's just a bit shallower and a bit more rounded than a Berg or a BergX. So if you never really liked the profile of a Berg, maybe try to get one of your hands on this. Obviously, these aren't quite available outside of the space race, but I imagine they'll be coming soon. And I really hope then we'll get more plastic choices. I really enjoy the hand feel of it. It feels really good for forehands. And as you can see, like I'm starting to get decent at doing a flip up forehand, which is something that I've been lacking. So I kind of have two options now with the BergX, and the range kind of has a little bit more separation. Like I said, I could still easily bag a Berg, and before the range came out, I was kind of throwing the Berg and the BergX. The typical Berg will be just a bit more stable and a bit more slower than the range, but the difference is not extremely noticeable. So some of that may come down to hand feel. I find this still reliably trustable until you try to throw it really hard or into a headwind. But like I said, for my throw style, it matches that Hyzer flip up that I like to throw with like proxies. So I can kind of have a similar throw style with this. And the way it will flip up and hold and finish straight, even when I kind of miss the angle a little bit, has tended to make it pretty accurate for me. Whereas occasionally with the Berg, if you miss the angle, they won't kind of flip up all the way and you miss a little bit, but not nearly as bad. And like I said, if you want the same flight as a range, you can pick up a K3 Berg, beat it in a little bit. These will get flippy pretty fast. And then if you want more stability and more dumpiness, then you go to the BergX, which like I said, I bag and has made a huge difference in my game this year. Because like I said, especially in the woods, like chopped forehands, approaches that just get down, it's made my standstill game, for whatever reason, I like having the thumb track on a standstill. I feel like I throw it a lot cleaner. And having the range now gives it a good complement for those forehand approach shots that will drift over, So it makes like a very, very good complement to me. And like I said, they feel great in the hand, and they have kind of their own separate use cases. I feel like they separate a little bit more than typically the Berg and the BergX. but you can kind of beat that in. And you do get more plastic options with the Bergs right now. Like I bag the K1 soft because the soft tends to sit down a little bit better, and you don't get big deflections if you hit trees or if you hit basket. Like if you're trying to approach with it, you'll get less rollaways with this soft guy versus something that's a little bit stiffer. And yet you still get the consistency of a BergX. So overall, I'm excited to see where MVP goes with this, to see if they can get like an overmold version and to see it in some other plastics. Again, like a soft proton is an amazing plastic, and if they make it in this, that'll be kind of the ultimate approach discs in my mind. And like I said, there are some advantages to having these puddle top drivers. They're forehandable. They handle torque better than like a lot of the lighter and thinner one speeds and stuff. So it kind of has a unique spot in the approach disc area. So anyway, there's the first review. Hopefully it's good, gives you a good in-depth of how these fly, and we'll start getting into some more fun stuff real soon. Yeah, like and subscribe if you feel like it. Check back. Hopefully these altitude disc reviews will help some of you more than your typical reviews if you play a lot in the thin air like I do. See you in the next one. For fun, we're gonna throw 8B or 7B over the water. Wrath, forehand, and geese. You really have to my T-pad. Oh, this course does have some long throws and some fun throws.